Congressman Barr, I want to start with you. You are part of the Opt-out Alliance, and your organization sent out an email today offering people one of these cards, essentially asking them to click online to get their rights. And you describe what's happening at the airport as this way. Groping, naked X-ray scans, and invasive searches are unconstitutional and should not be part of your holiday travel plans. My first question to you is that what is the alternative in the short term? Why should people opt out, tie up airport security lines on such a busy day of travel? Why can't we just have a conversation about maybe how we can improve things, but not disrupt commerce, disrupt holiday, and disrupt the economy?
Well, the major problem is the TSA has shown itself as recently as yesterday in comments by its administrator completely unwilling to consider changes to these very invasive, unreasonable searches of individual passengers without any suspicion that they've done anything wrong, John.
But there was any suspicion at all. But post 9/11, post the recent attempt to send these packages into the United States, there has to be some higher alert. How do you balance, understandably, the rights of Americans to be innocent until proven guilty with the right of this agency to say we want to prevent another 9/11?
It has nothing to do with innocent until proven guilty. It has to do with the Fourth Amendment's mandate that the government cannot conduct a search of somebody that's unreasonable. And if you take somebody, John, who has already gone through the normal background, or not the normal screening process, and then say, well, we want to give you an additional one, not because we believe you've done anything wrong, but just because we want to, that is unreasonable, and that's what people ought to be up in arms about.
Fran Townsend, committed to the conversation on that very basic point. Congressman Barr is saying this is flat out unconstitutional. Forget whether it's invasive, forget whether it's uncomfortable. He says it's unconstitutional.
Well, Congressman Barr and I do agree that TSA needs a lot of room for improvement, both communicating what they're going to do and why it's necessary. We also agree that this is a constitutional democracy, and if he believes that the procedures are unconstitutional, then there's a third branch of government, the courts, in which he can challenge the executive branch. But to call for this opt-out day is, frankly, irresponsible. The only people who are going to get hurt in this are your fellow American citizens who are trying to get to their families for a national holiday. The TSA is going to continue to do what they do tomorrow, whether Congressman Barr and his folks opt out or not. You're just going to slow down lines. But it really hands a propaganda win to our enemies. This is not the way to do it. We ought to debate it. We ought to have a conversation, and TSA ought to improve. But this isn't the way to do it.
Congressman Barr, I want to read something you wrote in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution yesterday. Recent polls indicate an air passenger rebellion is brewing, and none too soon. As a nation, are we ready to reaffirm our heritage and cast off the yoke of fear that has gripped us since September 11, 2001? Do we become once again a nation of laws in which the Bill of Rights still has meaning, or have we succumbed to the federal browbeaters who assert that whatever intrusions they assert are necessary for them to protect us are permissible? You say an air passenger rebellion is brewing. I want to borrow a Gary Hart line, I guess, and twist it a bit and say, where's the proof? In the sense that if you look at the polling, I know you're upset about this. I know many conservatives and libertarians are upset about this, and civil libertarians on the left as well. But if you ask all of the American people, this is an ABC News Washington Post poll, do you support or oppose the digital X-ray machines to screen passengers? 64% of Americans say they support them. 32% oppose. Are enhanced pat-down hand searches justified? Here's where you get a split. 48% say justified, 50% say not justified. But do the new TSA rules make you more likely to fly, less likely to fly, or no difference? 7 in 10 Americans, sir, say no difference.
I think you'd get a very different answer, John, if you polled instead of all the American public. Of course, it's very easy for people that don't fly to say, oh, yeah, go ahead, do a pat-down, do a full-body naked scan, or do whatever you need to. But it's very different if you ask people that actually have to go through this very intimidating, very invasive, and frankly, very humiliating process, even after they have already taken their belt off, taken their shoes off, sent their stuff through the metal and explosives detectors, taken their jackets off, taken their sweaters off. It's utterly unnecessary, and for the government to be able to say, do it just because we say you have to do it, is something that Americans are increasingly objecting to, and they should.
And Fran, answer the congressman's point in the sense that many people who think that this is theater, that essentially it's the facade of security so that Americans feel better, but the congressman doesn't think it's actually doing much good, and there are some people a lot of people who agree with him.
Well, John, we ought to be clear. When you go through the metal detector and the X-ray machines, that's looking for weapons. That isn't going to detect explosives. They are doing some swipe tests randomly right now for explosive residue, but by and large, we don't screen for explosives, and that's part of the problem. This is where I say the congressman and I agree that TSA needs to improve. We need to push research and development so we have the technology to detect explosives. In the meantime, when you have things like the Christmas Day bomber and Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula putting explosives in computer cartridges, you've got to do these pat-downs. There isn't much alternative right now, but we need to develop alternatives that are less intrusive. I do agree with that.
And one of the things, Congressman, that you recommend on these cards, you can go online and get, and I'm going to lift up a bigger copy of it here on the back. If detained, politely ask why you're being detained and specifically what is being investigated. At any time, you may invoke your Sixth Amendment privilege, pausing the investigation and allowing you to consult an attorney. So essentially, you're saying to people, make a point, prove a point. If they stop you, essentially say, hold on, I want a lawyer.
Absolutely, and the TSA regulations, you have to kind of dig for them, but we dug and we found some of them that are on the back of that card. The TSA doesn't tell you, or at least they don't advertise for you, do you have a right to opt out of the naked full-body scanner? You have a right to have a pat-down done in private, away from prying eyes of other people. You have a right to have somebody there with you to assist if you want it. There are a lot of things that people need to be aware of. The TSA doesn't advertise because, frankly, it would make their job a little more time-consuming, a little more difficult, and force them to be a little more professional, perhaps.
We'll keep an eye on how all this plays out tomorrow on opt-out day, as you hope it is, and we'll watch the debate. I'm sure this debate's going to continue for weeks and months into the new Congress. Bob Barr, Fran Townsend, thanks for your time tonight. Up next here, former and perhaps future Republican presidential candidate Mike Huckabee says President Obama should watch his wife and daughters go through those TSA screenings.